"Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." The words sliced through the opulent air of La Vigne Royale, New York's most prestigious French restaurant, like a knife tearing silk. In an instant, the clinking of silverware, the gentle hum of the piano, the hushed conversations of financiers and socialites all froze. The voice belonged to Victor Langford, CEO of Langford Dynamics, a man the press hailed as a technological genius. But in this moment, his face bore only cold contempt. On the sleeve of his $1 million suit, a few drops of dark Bordeaux had just spilled, spreading like a stain too shameful to tolerate. Standing before him was Maya Johnson, 28 years old, her uniform starkly different from the pristine white backdrop of the dining room. A fitted red blouse hugging her slender frame, a crisp white apron tied neatly at her waist. Her eyes, bright yet humble, still held the bottle of wine mid-pour. A single slip, one drop of Bordeaux outside the rim of the glass, had turned her into the target of public humiliation. Maya bent slightly, a folded napkin already in her hand. Her voice was soft, almost a courteous whisper. "I'm sorry, sir, let me clean that for you." But Victor did not see the apology. He did not see a young woman trying to do her job. He only saw the red blouse, the white apron, and the black skin set against the immaculate tablecloth. To him, they all merged into one image, a lowly servant who needed to be reminded of her place. And he chose humiliation as the reminder. The entire room froze. Some diners looked up, their faces uneasy. A few lowered their eyes, pretending to study the menu. But others allowed themselves a faint smirk, cruel smiles, savoring the spectacle of a human being diminished before them. At the table behind, whispers loud enough for Maya to hear, typical of colored staff, always clumsy. Another voice, followed by a snicker. "I don't know why they even hire them here." Those words landed heavier than the wine on Victor's sleeve. Maya stood still, napkin in hand, bottle on the table, her face betrayed no emotion, no anger, no tears, only silence, so dense it pressed on the entire room. Victor casually grabbed his own napkin, scrubbing at his sleeve, without sparing her another glance. To him, it was nothing, a minor accident, a chance to display power. A spilled drop, a cruel sentence, a trampled person, none of it mattered. But the eyes around them had seen. Phones had already begun to record secretly. And Maya's silence, in her red blouse and white apron, became an image that could not be erased. A black woman demeaned in a room of luxury where everyone else chose silence. The music did not return. Conversations resumed, but haltingly, fragmented, as if people were trying to cover up what they had all just witnessed. But the air had shifted. And from that drop of red wine, a storm was about to rise. Victor Langford's words still hung in the air, like a jagged scar on the polished walls of La Vigne Royale. The music had not returned. The clinking of forks and spoons had vanished. Only the sound of hearts beating, chairs shifting slightly, and then the whispers seeping through the silence like an underground stream. At a nearby table, a grey-haired man in a black tuxedo leaned close to his wife, his voice loud enough for those around to hear. "I told you, didn't I? Colored staff are always clumsy. They never know how to keep standards." His wife nodded lightly, her eyes glinting with disdain. At another table, a young man with the easy confidence of privilege curled his lip, probably just hired to make the place look diverse. "Skills, please." His friend snickered, trying to stifle the sound, but unable to hide his delight at the spectacle they had just witnessed. Maya heard it all. Every word, every sharp, mocking laugh, cutting straight into her ears. Her hands tightened slightly against the white apron at her waist, yet her face remained calm, not because she didn't feel the pain, but because she was too familiar with wounds like these. wounds that didn't draw blood, yet cut deeper than any blade. By the window, an older businesswoman, her silver hair neatly brushed, a diamond ring the size of a grape glinting on her finger, set her glass down and murmured to her companion, "Such a shame, but then again, in a restaurant like this, I wouldn't expect more from them. Them, just 2 syllables, but enough to carve a cruel boundary. They would never be us." Them was a group pushed outside, defined not by names or qualities, but by skin color. A few younger diners, perhaps unaccustomed to the suffocating tension, exchanged uneasy looks. One whispered, "Don't you think that was a bit much? She only spilled a few drops of wine." But the voice was silenced instantly by a stern glance from his father at the table. "Be quiet. This is not the place to defend the help." That invisible slap made the young man lower his head, his eyes reddening, but he remained silent. And in that room, silence itself became the loudest sound. The silence of the majority. The silence of complicity. Victor Langford leaned back in his chair, lifting a fresh glass of wine as if nothing had happened. He knew the whispers were spreading around him, yet he didn't care. To him, they were just background music, an invisible applause for the power he believed he had just displayed. Maya still stood there. Red blouse, white apron, striking against the golden glow of chandeliers. But in the eyes of many, she was nothing more than an unwanted blotch of color in a painting of luxury. In the corner, a young couple giggled as they filmed secretly with a phone. This clip is definitely going viral. Billionaire insults black waitress. People are going to go crazy. Yeah, and then it'll fade in a few days. Nothing new here. They did not see a human being. They only saw entertainment. Maya drew a deep breath. She knew all eyes were on her, not for who she was, but for the inferiority they believed she represented. She knew she could react, could cry, could walk away. But if she did, they would nod knowingly and whisper, "See, weak, couldn't handle the pressure." So she chose another path. She straightened her back, placed the napkin back on the tray, lifted the wine bottle, and continued her service as if nothing had happened. Each step, measured, calm, made the room feel heavier. Sometimes, the silence of one person becomes a mirror reflecting the ugliness of everyone else. From the far side of the room, Samuel Whitmore, a seasoned investor, watched quietly. His old eyes, still sharp, followed Maya's every move. He heard not just one insult, but a chorus of disdain, whispers, scoffs, bowed heads. He had lived long enough to recognize this was no accident. This was the portrait of an entire system of prejudice. He set his knife and fork down, his hand trembling slightly, not from age but from restraint. Meanwhile, Maya stooped to pick up a spoon dropped by a little girl at the following table, smiling gently as she placed it back into the child's hand. In that moment, the contrast was stark. A woman belittled could still offer kindness, while the powerful were busy exposing their own meanness. Soft laughter bubbled from another table. "Look at her, still pretending to be polite." A sharp female voice cut in. "Have you ever seen a white server treated like that?" "No. Only the colored ones get away with making a mess here." Maya heard it. Her heart clenched, but her steps did not falter. She understood. This was never just about a drop of Bordeaux. It was about identity, about skin, about the place they believed she should remain. And in that silence, Maya told herself, "If I collapse, they will be right. But if I stand tall, they will have to see." To understand Maya's calm silence that night at Vigne Royale, one must look back at the road that shaped her. A road paved with shadows, loss, and battles fought in silence, unseen by anyone else. Maya Johnson was born in a poor neighborhood in the South Bronx. Cramped apartments, walls peeling paint, stairwells that reeked of dampness. This was her childhood. Her mother, Lydia Johnson, worked night shifts as a nurse. her hands cracked from endless hours in rubber gloves and disinfectants. Her father, a construction worker, walked out when Maya was only 6. From then on, the family consisted of just 3, Lydia, Maya, and her younger brother Ethan. Maya understood early that she could not live like other children. While her friends played soccer and jumped rope, Maya learned how to cook, fold laundry, and lull Ethan to sleep. Ethan was not like other children. He was born with cerebral palsy. His legs were frail, his hands trembled, yet his smile could light up the entire room. Every time Ethan laughed, Maya felt she had a reason to keep going, even as life piled unbearable weights upon her shoulders. At 15, Maya discovered she had legs like the wind. On the school track, when she ran, she left behind her mother's weary sighs, Ethan's faint groans, and all the worries that hemmed her in. She ran as though breaking free from a narrow world. Her coach told her, "You're a lightning bolt. If you stay the course, you can make the Olympics." Maya believed him. She devoted mornings to class, afternoons to the track, evenings to caring for Ethan. And the dream began to take shape. She won a full athletic scholarship to a prestigious university. The ticket out of poverty seemed to be in her hands. But fate always finds a way to test those who dare to dream. At 17, her mother fell ill. Lung cancer, sudden, brutal. The hospital became their second home. The medical bills stacked up, impossibly high. Maya began skipping practices to take her mother's shifts. She waited tables in diners, stood at supermarket registers, and scrubbed office floors at dawn. One freezing winter night, as snow fell outside the hospital window, Lydia clasped Maya's hand and whispered, "You must be strong, for Ethan too. Don't let the world tell you you're not enough just because you're black. Show them your dignity." Those were her last words. She passed the next morning. Maya was only 18. The Olympic scholarship vanished. She folded her dream like a wrinkled sheet of paper and tucked it away in the drawer of memory. She gave up the lecture hall, the track, and stepped into the grind of survival. 3 jobs in a single week. Mornings at a cafe, afternoons cleaning offices, nights serving tables at a diner. Her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, her hands hardened with calluses, but Ethan had his medicine and he still attended physical therapy. He would often ask, "Are you tired, sis?" Maya would smile. "No, as long as you can still smile, I can still run." The world outside had never been fair. There were days when customers barked at her. "Move, you black girl." Once applying for a hotel job, she was turned down because of her natural curls. "Our hotel prefers a neater, more polished look." She never argued. She walked on in silence. Not because she was weak, but because she understood. Every harsh word, every contemptuous glance only steeled her will. As Ethan grew older, Maya began choosing jobs in more upscale places, not for the pay, but for another reason. She wanted to observe. At La Vigne Royale, where the wealthy flaunted tuxedos and gowns, she learned more than any business class could teach. How some powerful men treated servers as objects. How a rare few still bowed their heads and said thank you. And how a single remark could divide a room into us and them. Maya realized true power did not lie in money, but in how one treated others. Her silence was never submission. It was a strategy. She knew that one day that silence would echo like a bell, awakening those who had long refused to hear. So tonight, when Victor Langford humiliated her before the entire restaurant, when whispers of prejudice spread like smoke across the room, Maya stood still. Not because she did not bleed, but because she had lived with wounds long enough to know how to turn them into strength. In the eyes of many, she was just a clumsy waitress in red and white who spilled a few drops of wine. But to those who understood, she was proof of a journey, from a girl who lost her mother, who folded away her Olympic dream, who carried a disabled brother on her shoulders, to a woman who knew that dignity could never be decided by someone else. And it was that journey that would make tonight unforgettable. The dining hall of La Vigne Royale slowly regained the clinking of silverware and the hum of awkward conversation. Yet the heavy silence from moments before had not lifted. It lingered above everyone like a thin veil, waiting for the most minor tear to rip it apart. Maya Johnson knew this well. She carried on with her duties, the tray of wine steady in her hands, her gaze lowered, her steps unhurried. The black shoes tapping against the wooden floor gave off faint clicks, like the patient heartbeat of someone long accustomed to endurance. She approached the central table once again, this time not to pour wine, but to refill water. She moved gracefully, the cool glass bottle in her hand, each step measured as though she were calculating the precise distance between herself and the heavy stairs surrounding her. When Maya reached his side, Victor Langford was still speaking loudly, trying to reclaim the table's attention. 3 points of growth, next quarter will surpass projections. We're not just leading technology, we're shaping the future. His voice rang out evenly, deliberate, but noticeably louder than necessary. It was no longer a presentation, it was a performance to patch over the storm he had created. Maya tilted the bottle, pouring water for the guests beside him. Her hand was steady, unshaken. When she reached Victor's glass, she bent slightly, leaning in. At that moment, his hand shot out. Not to hold the glass, but to clamp tightly around Maya's wrist. His grip was firm enough to jolt the bottle, causing a splash of water to spill across the pristine tablecloth. The table went still. Several forks froze mid-air. Victor didn't look at his glass. He fixed his gaze on Maya, eyes cold, his breath heavy with wine. "Listen closely," he growled, his tone low enough to evade the following table, yet loud enough for his own guests to hear. "When we talk billions, you stand still. Servants need to know their place. Don't ever intrude on the moments of men." His fingers squeezed, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to send a message. Power means control. Maya did not pull away immediately. She looked at him, dark eyes, deep and steady, not resisting, not fearful, only a calmness so unexpected that even Victor faltered for a second. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. Her voice did not tremble. It did not weaken. "I understand completely." Then she withdrew her hand. No yank, no struggle, just a quiet retreat, as if his hand had never touched her at all. That composure only heightened the tension in the room. Those who witnessed it knew instantly. This woman in the red blouse and white apron was not weak. She did not fight because she chose to stand firm. At a table behind, a man shook his head, exhaling a dry laugh. "That's the way. Know your place and you'll be fine." The woman beside him added coolly, "These colored servers often forget where they belong." Good thing Mr. Langford reminded her. Whispers like needles pricked through the already suffocating air. At the head of the table, Samuel Whitmore set down his utensils, his eyes fixed on Maya, on the composure in her gaze, on the same hand that had been gripped moments earlier now pouring calmly for the next guest, as though nothing had happened. Memories rushed back. He saw himself 50 years ago, held back, told to know your place. The difference was clear. Back then, he had lowered his head. Tonight, Maya stood straight, silent, but never bowed. Victor leaned back in his chair, satisfied, as if he had just taught a lesser being a lesson. He did not realize the eyes upon him, the phones discreetly lifting to record. He thought his power was absolute. But in truth, it was laying bare its most shameful face. Maya walked on, never looking back. The wrist that had just been gripped rested firmly on her tray, unshaken. No one in the room spoke, but everyone knew a line had been crossed. This was no longer a service accident. This was deliberate humiliation. Words had become action, and once they had left their mark upon the body, that contempt could no longer be concealed. It had become evidence, clear, raw, undeniable. Within each person, emotions surged differently. Some despised Maya even more, for they were used to siding with power. Others were unsettled, yet silent, afraid of consequence. A rare few, like Samuel, felt an ember glowing within, the ember of memory, of justice buried too long. Maya sensed it all. The whispers behind her, the downcast eyes of fear, and the piercing gaze of Samuel Whitmore. Still, she calmly gathered her tray and continued her work. In her mind, her mother's voice echoed, "Don't let the world tell you you're not enough just because you're black. Show them your dignity." And so she stayed silent. Not the silence of a coward, but the silence of someone who knew. Sometimes silence thunders louder than any scream. That night, Victor Langford's hand might have seemed to teach Maya a lesson, but he did not know. It was the beginning of the chain of events that would bring down the empire he had built. A single grip that seemed meaningless. It would mark the tremor of an earthquake. After slipping her wrist free from Victor's cold grip, Maya Johnson returned to her tray as if nothing had happened. Her soft steps on the wooden floor beat steadily, each one carrying a silent message. "I am not subdued." But to the observers, that silence only thickened the air, making the room even more unbearable. A few diners glanced at one another, not to intervene, but to justify their own stillness. She didn't say anything. It must not be that serious, they told themselves. Yet deep in their eyes lay a heaviness, for Maya's quiet was not submission, it was an unspoken accusation. She went on with her work. The red blouse gleamed, the white apron stark, her hands precise, lifting glasses, pouring water, retrieving fallen napkins. Her gestures no longer resembled mere service, but strokes of paint across the chaotic canvas of the room. At a nearby table, a little boy accidentally dropped his fork. The sharp clang on the floor turned heads. Maya stepped over, bent down, and picked it up. She didn't just return it to the table. She smiled gently, leaning close to whisper, "It's all right. Everyone drops things sometimes." The boy grinned shyly, eyes bright. His parents looked momentarily unsettled because in Maya's gaze they saw what they themselves lacked: kindness in a moment of humiliation. Meanwhile, at the central table, Victor Langford droned on, desperate to reclaim control. What makes a winner is the ability to rise above small distractions. The strong never allow themselves to lose focus. The guests nodded, their smiles stiff, their eyes shadowed with fear. No one dared mention what had just happened. They chose silence because silence was safe. In contrast, Maya chose silence not for safety, but for dignity. She did not answer Victor. She did not walk away. She stood in her work, and in doing so forced every gaze to turn back upon itself. At the far end, an elderly guest leaned toward his companion. "That girl is strange. If it were me, I'd have run." His friend replied, "No, she knows that running would hand them the victory. This silence, that is defiance." Samuel Whitmore was still watching. He heard no words from Maya, but he saw everything: the way she stooped to pick up the child, the smile despite the humiliation, the fire in her eyes shining bright within that red blouse against a sea of power. He understood her silence was her strength. True strength does not need to shout. In that room, some thought Maya was silent because she was weak. In truth, her silence only exposed Victor's arrogance more starkly. When someone is demeaned and does not fight back, the whole world is forced to ask, what did we witness? A group of younger guests, seated far from the center, exchanged hushed words. One girl whispered, "She's so brave." Her friend shook his head. "No, she's just doing her job." The girl stared back firmly. "That's exactly why it's brave." Maya returned to the counter, setting the bottle down. She drew a deep breath to steady herself, then stepped back into the hall with a fresh tray. Her heart ached, but her face remained composed. In her mind appeared the image of Ethan, her disabled younger brother. She remembered his question on a cold winter night. "Does it hurt you when people look down on you?" And her reply with a smile, "No, Ethan, because when I stay silent, they are forced to hear their own voices." Tonight at La Vigne Royale, she was keeping her promise. Maya's silence did more than shame the decent, it enraged the cruel. At a nearby table, a fur-draped woman sneered bitterly. "She stares as if she's above us. Red blouse or not, she's still just a black waitress." The remark drew a few chuckles, but also some frowns, because everyone could see it. That very red blouse and white apron made Maya stand out more than any evening gown in the room. And so, her silence became the center. Not Victor, not his billion-dollar speech, but the black woman in red and white, standing firm in the storm. The entire room, no matter how much they tried to hide it, knew what mattered tonight was not the contracts. It was how a woman of color was treated, and how she chose to face it. Maya's silence was not an ending, but a beginning. It was the pause before the storm. And from that silence, an earthquake would be born. One that would topple the arrogant empire of Victor Langford. Inside the suffocating air of La Vigne Royale, as the clinking of cutlery resumed awkwardly and conversations pretended to flow again, there was still one pair of eyes that had not left Maya Johnson. The eyes of Samuel Whitmore. Samuel sat at the head of the table, only a few seats away from Victor Langford. He was past 70 now, his silver hair neatly combed, his face etched with the deep lines of a life that had seen too much. In the world of finance, people called him the dangerous silent man. Because Samuel did not need to speak often, a single nod from him could shift billions. Tonight, he was invited not as a negotiator, but as a witness to the $3.5 billion deal between his firm and Langford Dynamics. But from the very moment Victor humiliated Maya, Samuel understood this dinner was no longer a negotiation. It had become a tribunal. His memory reached back. Chicago, 1950s. Samuel was just 10 years old, growing up in a poor neighborhood. His mother often took him on crowded buses. He remembered one day seeing a black woman shoved aside by a white man who barked, "You don't belong on this bus." The woman did not cry. She stood, straightened her coat, and quietly sat down at the very back. Samuel's mother squeezed his hand and whispered, "You see, some people don't need to shout. They make the whole world ashamed simply by standing tall." Half a century later, that memory returned vividly in Maya. Red blouse, white apron, tray in hand, calmly continuing her work after being gripped and demeaned. Samuel set down his knife and fork, his eyes fixed on Victor. He said nothing, but the weight of his gaze struck like a hammer. Those seated nearby felt it, lowering their heads, avoiding his stare. Victor, oblivious, carried on boasting. The 18 months for full returns, strategic partners already secured, a global brand. This is an opportunity no one else can deliver. The more Victor spoke, the more hollow his words became to Samuel. For he had already seen the truth. A man can build an empire on ambition, but lose it all in a single sentence. As Maya passed behind Samuel to serve another table, he turned slightly and caught her eyes. In that fleeting instant, he saw not only composure, but also a quiet ache, the kind of pain she chose to keep inside, refusing to turn it into a spectacle for the room. Samuel gave a slight nod, so subtle no one else noticed, but Maya did. And in that nod, she found something rare, recognition. A young aide seated next to Samuel leaned in to whisper, "Mr. Whitmore, do we really want to proceed? Langford is clearly—" Samuel raised his hand, signaling silence. He didn't interrupt. He didn't want to add to the noise. But within him, the decision was already made. He reflected on his principle. Money must walk alongside values. A company might promise billions in profit, but if it were led by a man who trampled human dignity, then that profit would one day become a pit swallowing everyone who stepped inside. As Victor continued, Samuel leaned toward his aide and murmured in a low voice, "It's time to prepare an alternative." The aide nodded, pulled out his phone, and quietly slipped from the room. Victor remained unaware. He kept smiling, parading numbers, believing he was still in control. He did not realize he had just lost the most crucial thing, trust. At the far end, some guests stole glances at Maya. A few snickered, others shook their heads, but all knew tonight was no longer about contracts. It was about a black woman humiliated and a powerful investor silently watching. Samuel sighed, an old sadness rising within him. Throughout his career, he had encountered hundreds like Victor, brilliant, ambitious, yet so arrogant they disdained human worth. And through the years, Samuel had chosen carefully, making decisions on a single measure. Does this person deserve power? Victor had just given his answer. Dinner continued, but no one honestly ate. The main course, duck in orange glaze, was served, fragrant and rich, yet knives and forks merely scraped the surface. Everyone was waiting, not for dessert, not for a signature. They were waiting for Samuel Whitmore to speak. And when Samuel spoke, they all knew no one would dare oppose him. In that silence, his eyes drifted once more toward Maya. She was still at work, bending gently to straighten a guest's napkin, her smile soft as if nothing had happened. Samuel clenched his hand on the table. In his eyes, a final decision flashed. Tonight, not just a deal would end. A dynasty would fall. The music returned, but no longer carried its earlier elegance. It now felt like a thin cloth, stretched over cracks that were already too deep. Guests lifted their wine glasses again, but none could taste the pleasure. The dining room had become a stage, and everyone knew Act 2 of the play was about to begin. Maya Johnson returned to the central table, a silver tray in her hands, calmly pouring wine for the guests. Her motions were precise, her gaze steady, as if the humiliation earlier had been nothing but a passing draft. Yet within her, every whisper, every mocking laugh still burned like hidden scars. She poured for the guest on Victor's left, then the one on his right. All went smoothly, until she reached Victor's half-empty glass. She leaned down, tilting the bottle of Bordeaux. The crimson liquid rippled as it streamed into the glass, and then just one small plop of a drop falling outside the rim, like a spark touching a barrel of gunpowder. Victor seized the moment. A sharp laugh burst from him, half sneer, half performance. The sound cracked through the tense room like a whip. Typical of colored servers, he said deliberately, loud enough for the entire table to hear. Clumsy, slow, stupid. They only hire you people to make the place look diverse, but your real worth. He lifted his glass, smirking, and finished. Isn't worth a cent or so. The words stabbed deeper than before. Several guests turned away, unable to meet Maya's eyes, knowing they had just witnessed something indefensible. A young woman gasped softly, "Oh my God!" But her husband quickly seized her hand, signaling her to stay silent. The whispers rose again. Some chuckled, treating it as a form of entertainment. Others shook their heads in disgust, yet remained mute, for no one wished to cross Victor Langford, the billionaire who could end careers with a single phone call. Maya stood still, the bottle in her hand. This second insult was no longer a sudden knife. It was a hammer blow, deliberate, meant to shatter every shard of dignity she held. In that instant, she saw her mother, Lydia, in memory, lying in a hospital bed, holding her hand, whispering, "You don't need to shout to prove your worth. True dignity speaks for itself." Maya set the bottle down and bowed her head slightly. "Please, sir, enjoy your meal," she said. Her voice was low, steady, without the slightest tremor. Then she stepped back, resuming her work. It was this composure that deepened the heaviness in the air. For repeated humiliation had passed beyond the bounds of a moment of anger. This was no outburst. This was a declaration. Victor had revealed himself. His contempt was not an accident, but a way of life. At a table behind, a young businessman whispered to his friend, "He's digging his own grave." The friend frowned sharply. "Quiet. Don't let anyone hear. Langford could destroy your career overnight." That fear, that silence, that was what fed men like Victor. Samuel Whitmore remained still, but his eyes had changed. If before they had only observed, now they burned with a cold resolve. He didn't need to speak. Anyone who looked at him could feel it. He had passed judgment. Victor remained oblivious. He leaned back in his chair, waving his hand, voice booming louder. "You see, I don't fear being blunt. Anyone who doesn't know their place must be reminded. That is how I lead. That is why Langford Dynamics is always on top." Several directors at the table nodded stiffly, their smiles plastered in place. They nodded not out of agreement, but out of fear. Maya moved on, pouring water at another table. Her heart ached, but her eyes still shone and her back remained straight. She knew his words were aimed not just at her, but at an entire community, at all the people of color who had ever been dismissed, ever been told to know their place. She was silent, but now her silence was no longer a defense. It was an indictment, sharper than any retort could be. An older guest, long used to keeping quiet, leaned to his wife and whispered, "That girl has a strange kind of strength, a strength without words." The woman nodded, her eyes brimming. "Yes, she makes me ashamed that I didn't stand up." The dinner carried on in form, but everyone knew. No one tasted the food, no one cared for Victor's endless numbers. The focus of the night was a woman in a red blouse and white apron, humiliated twice, yet still standing with the quiet dignity of silence. And that repeated humiliation was like an invisible final stroke of ink. Not just for dinner, but for Victor Langford's future. Victor Langford's mocking laughter still echoed around the table, as if he had just secured a victory. But what victory? No one in the room laughed with him, only strained faces, averted eyes, and a silence heavy as lead. Maya Johnson stepped back, bottle of wine in hand, her face calm. She did not answer. She did not resist. And it was precisely her composure that left Victor's insults naked, hollow, clanging like metal against a cold wall. Then, the scrape of Samuel Whitmore's chair. He stood. Not quickly, not abruptly, but slowly, deliberately, each movement carrying the weight of a lifetime of power. At once, the room fell silent. Conversation ceased. Cutlery froze mid-air. Even the band in the corner stopped playing. The luxurious hall dropped into absolute stillness, as if all were awaiting a verdict. Samuel adjusted his vest button, his eyes fixed directly on Victor. No anger, no theatrics, only a cold composure. "Mr. Langford," he began, his voice deep and resonant, "before we discuss contracts any further, there is someone significant I want to introduce to you, someone you have just demeaned." Victor arched a brow, forcing a sneer. "What? Some financial advisor? A lawyer?" Samuel did not answer right away. Instead, he raised his hand, gesturing toward the far end of the room. Maya stepped forward. No more silver tray. No more white apron. Only the striking red blouse and eyes dark and luminous under the golden lights. She walked towards Samuel. No bowing, no rushing. Each step commanded the gaze of the entire room. And in that moment, people realized this was not the walk of a servant. It was the walk of someone who belonged here. Maya stopped beside Samuel. Not behind him, beside him. Samuel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. His voice rang clear, each word striking the table like a gavel. "This is Maya Johnson, my daughter." The room froze in shock. It was as if the air had been sucked out. Even the wine in the glasses trembled. Samuel continued, his eyes sweeping across every guest. "I adopted Maya when she was 7 years old. She kept her family name because it was a matter of honor, a tribute to her mother's memory. But from that day until now, Maya has been my daughter, in my heart and in every true sense of the word family." Victor stiffened, the crooked smile vanishing from his face. "What? She is—" "Not she," Samuel cut him off, his tone sharp. "She is. The woman you just called stupid. The woman whose wrist you gripped to display your power. The woman you thought was a nameless servant. She is my daughter, and more than that, she is living proof of the values you will never understand. Dignity, patience, and silent strength." A wave of whispers spread across the room. Phones were raised high, recording every second. On many faces, shock mingled with shame. Maya stood tall. She did not smile. She did not cry. She let the truth stand. After all her silence, she was finally seen. Samuel turned, addressing the entire hall. "You have all heard. You have all witnessed. And I need not speak of numbers or profits any further. Business cannot be separated from values. A man may build an empire through ruthlessness, but tonight shows us clearly that is not leadership. That is arrogance." Victor broke into a sweat, forcing a trembling smile, his voice faltering. "Mr. Whitmore, let's not allow a small matter to ruin—" "A small matter," Samuel interrupted, his voice not loud, yet powerful enough to shake the room. "No, Mr. Langford, this is not a small matter. This is the measure of character, and tonight you have revealed yours to the world." A chair scraped. A guest stood. Then another. Soon the sound of chairs echoed across the room as people rose to their feet. No words were spoken, but all understood. The $3.5 billion deal had just died at this very table. Victor sat frozen. In his hand the glass trembled, Bordeaux sloshing red as blood. Maya remained where she was, in the same room where, just an hour ago, she had been treated as a shadow. Now every eye was fixed upon her, not with pity, but with respect, not with disdain, but with recognition. And in that moment, an empire began to fall. The unfinished music fell into silence. Chairs scraped across the floor. Guests rose one by one, not loudly, not with words, but each departing step cut into Victor Langford's pride like a knife. The billion-dollar banquet, where Victor should have been hailed as a king of technology, had transformed into a public trial, and the verdict was clear. No one wanted to share his table. News spread faster than the Bordeaux that had spilled across the tablecloth. Within minutes, videos of Victor insulting Maya began appearing across social media. What had started as discreet phones held low now became weapons raised high. A single headline rippled across Twitter. "Billionaire CEO calls black waitress stupid in the middle of luxury restaurant." Within an hour, the video had millions of views. Comments flooded in like a storm. The true face of the elite. Who does he think he is to trample on others like that? When I see that woman, I see everything my parents endured. Meanwhile, at the banquet table, Victor tried desperately to salvage himself. He leapt to his feet, voice trembling, but straining for authority. "This is a misunderstanding. You all know I didn't mean it like that. Just a moment of temper." But no one listened. The empty chairs, the cold stares, and the icy silence gave him his answer. The phone in his pocket buzzed incessantly. Victor pulled it out, scanned the screen, and his face drained of color. An email from the board. "Urgent, you must respond immediately." A message from his PR advisor. "All sponsors are demanding answers." A Bloomberg alert. "Langford Dynamics risks losing $3.5 billion deal after racist incident." Sweat broke across Victor's forehead. Across the room, Samuel Whitmore sat calmly, his hand resting on Maya's shoulder. He needed no more words. He knew, from the moment he had declared Maya his daughter, the balance of power had shifted. Because a deal can be revived. A company can be restructured. But a character once exposed can never be restored. That very night, just hours after the banquet, Langford Dynamics became the center of every central news channel. CNBC, CNN, and Financial Times all ran the video. The words, "Don't touch me, stupid black girl," echoed across broadcasts, replayed, clipped, dissected. A market analyst spoke bluntly. "This isn't just a PR crisis. This is a values crisis, and investors never pour money into arrogance." When markets opened the next morning, Langford Dynamics' stock plunged 23%. More than $7 billion in market value evaporated in a matter of hours. Major shareholders sent letters demanding Victor's resignation. Several suppliers announced they were reviewing partnerships. On social media, the hashtag boycott. Langford exploded, trending worldwide. People shared the image of Maya in her red blouse and white apron as a symbol of silent pride. Victor sat in his high-rise office the next morning, staring out over the Manhattan skyline. The city still pulsed with life, cars swarming the streets, but for him everything had changed. The phone rang relentlessly, no longer with applause, only cold voices, demanding, warning, condemning. He remembered Maya's eyes, silent, steady, without a single word of protest. Yet they had made him feel smaller than ever before. And he understood. His downfall hadn't begun with a drop of Bordeaux, but with the arrogance carved deep inside him, the belief that power mattered more than human dignity. Across the city, Maya sat quietly in a small cafe with Samuel. She still wore the red blouse, but no longer the white apron. Before her lay the morning paper, its headline bold, "Victor Langford loses $3.5 billion deal after humiliating waitress." Maya gazed at the page, then lifted her eyes to the sunlight spilling through the window. She felt no glee, no triumph. She did not smile. She recognized a simple truth. Sometimes all it takes is one person's silence for the whole world to hear finally. Victor had lost the deal. Lost his CEO chair. Lost the reputation he had spent decades building. All of it within 24 hours. And it had all begun with one drop of red wine on his sleeve, and one sentence that never should have been spoken. 3 days after that fateful night at Vigne Royale, New York City seemed transformed. Across newspapers, television, and social media, no one spoke of Langford Dynamics' latest technology. No one cared about billion-dollar figures. Everything revolved around a single image. A black woman in a red blouse and white apron, standing tall in the storm of humiliation, her eyes calm and silent. Maya Johnson. That name was now everywhere. Not as a story of pity, but as a symbol of dignity. On Monday morning, a special assembly was held at Whitmore Capital headquarters. Over 1,000 employees from New York to Singapore watched live on screens. In the grand hall, Maya stepped onto the stage. No longer in a waitress uniform. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her hair neatly tied back, her face radiant yet not prideful. On the table before her lay a newly engraved nameplate. Maya Johnson, Director of Human Dignity and Equity. The room was silent as Maya held the microphone. Her voice rang steady, unwavering, carrying immense weight. 3 days ago, I was called stupid, not because I made a mistake, but because I am black. Those words are not new. They echo thousands of others that have weighed down generations before me. But this time, there was a difference. The whole world heard them. She paused. Her gaze swept across the hall, then fixed on the camera, as if speaking directly to every employee watching worldwide. We cannot control every word spoken about us, but we can control how we respond. I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I wanted the truth to speak for itself. Applause broke out, then quickly fell quiet as Maya lifted her hand to continue. I believe a company does not exist only to generate profit. A company exists to prove that all people have worth, whether you are an engineer, an accountant, or a server. Whether you wear a suit or an apron. Dignity is not a prize for the successful. Dignity is a birthright. Many bowed their heads, some wiped away tears. They realized this was not just the story of one arrogant CEO, this was about them, about every time they had remained silent in the face of injustice. After the meeting, Samuel Whitmore approached Maya. He said little, only placing his hand on her shoulder, his eyes glowing with pride. "You have done what our generation never dared to do," he whispered. Maya smiled softly. "No, father, I only did what my mother once told me. Stand tall so the world is forced to see itself." Maya's story spread beyond the company. A week later, at a Bronx high school where she herself had once been a poor student, Maya returned, this time not as a pupil, but as a speaker. Before hundreds of black students, she said, "You will hear words like, 'You're not good enough,' or 'You don't belong here.' But remember, your worth is not in someone else's mouth. It lies in how you stand firm." The entire hall rose in applause. In the crowd, a boy with a disability in a wheelchair raised his notebook high, smiling brightly. That look made Maya's eyes glisten. It reminded her of Ethan, the brother who had been her reason never to collapse. And Victor Langford? He vanished from public sight. The media reported that after losing his position, his shares, and even his closest allies, he withdrew to a suburban mansion, avoiding all cameras. His name now lived only as an example of arrogance that had been paid in full. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson's name appeared everywhere as the opposite. Proof that kindness and dignity, even in the plainest uniform, hold more power than any billion-dollar empire. A month later, a photo of Maya, red blouse, white apron, standing tall in the luxurious dining room, was hung in the main corridor of Whitmore Capital. Beneath it was her own quote, "Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice of dignity." That became Maya's legacy. Not just a title. Not just the downfall of a billionaire. But a reminder to all, justice does not always echo in the gavel's strike. Sometimes it resounds in the straight-backed stance of a young woman, in red and white, humiliated in a room of power, yet unbroken. That night, back in her small apartment, Maya sat by the window, looking at the city lights. Her phone buzzed, a message from a colleague. "Thank you. Because of you, today I finally dared to say no when I was disrespected." Maya smiled faintly. She knew her journey had only just begun, but at least the world had shifted. Not because she shouted, but because she stood firm. And for the audience, the story closes not in gloating over a man's downfall, but with a quiet reminder. How we treat those we think are the smallest. That is the true legacy we leave behind.